She had stopped screaming hours ago, not because the pain had faded, not because hope had arrived, but because Sarah Kane had finally accepted what the twin sons of Kelson Vav had been trying to tell her since the moment her exile pod crashed into this crystalline wasteland. No one was coming. No one ever came to Kelson V. That was the point. The sand beneath her wasn't sand at all, not really. It was pulverized crystal, each grain sharp enough to draw blood, charged with static electricity that made her skin crawl, even as dehydration turned it papery and gray. Her people, the Aetheri, had pale blue skin that darkened to cobalt when healthy, when hydrated, when alive. Hers had faded to the color of old ice. Sarah lay half-buried where she'd collapsed, her left leg shattered at an angle that would have made her scream if she had the moisture left for tears. The energy cuffs around her wrists had died 2 days ago, their power cells finally surrendering to the relentless heat. But they hadn't released. They never released. That was part of the design. A reminder that even in exile, even in death, she belonged to the Aetheri Council. Former Admiral Sarah Kane, 58 years old, 40 years of service, decorated 17 times, author of the Kelson Doctrine that had won the 3rd year of the war, mentor to a generation of tactical officers who now commanded the fleet. And here she was, dying alone on a planet whose name was a curse. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 4 decades teaching officers how to win battles, how to outthink enemies, how to turn terrain into advantage. Now the terrain was killing her, and all her brilliant tactical mind could do was catalog exactly how her body was shutting down. Kidney failure, probably. Her last urination had been dark as oil. Liver stress from the toxins in the air. The atmosphere here was breathable, technically, but it carried trace elements that accumulated in organic tissue. Long enough exposure and you'd poison yourself just by breathing. The council knew all this, of course. They'd studied Kelson V extensively. That's why they used it. Sarah's vision blurred, the twin suns overhead merging into a single white-hot coin. Her thoughts fragmented, memories breaking through the present like shrapnel through armor. The council chamber, austere and cold, all gunmetal surfaces and harsh lighting, designed to make the accused feel small. She'd stood at attention before the 7 judges, her uniform still crisp despite 3 days in holding. Admiral Sarah Kane, the head counselor, had said, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment that authority figures wielded like a weapon. You are charged with compassion toward the enemy, not murder, not incompetence, not cowardice, compassion. The word had hung in the air like an obscenity. During engagement 17 Delta, you were given a direct firing solution on enemy vessel Refugee 7. The target was confirmed hostile. The order was given. You delayed. Sarah hadn't denied it. The delay lasted long enough for the vessel to repair emergency propulsion and execute a jump. 340 enemy combatants escaped because of your hesitation. They weren't combatants, Sarah had replied, her voice steady. The manifest showed civilians, children. The vessel was unarmed, its distress beacon active. They were evacuating a colony under bombardment. An enemy colony, launching enemy ships, containing enemy personnel who would live to fight, to breed, to sustain their resistance another generation. The head counselor had leaned forward then, his silver eyes fixed on hers with something that might have been genuine curiosity. Did you think you were being merciful, Admiral? Sarah had met his gaze without flinching. I thought I was being Aetheri. I thought we fought to protect our people, not to exterminate others. And that, the counselor had said softly, is why you are compromised. The word had appeared in her file 17 times during the trial. Compromised by exposure to human philosophy, tainted by emotional reasoning, corrupted by the belief that an enemy's life held value. The Aetheri didn't execute dissenters. That would be crude, wasteful. Instead, they refined them away. They placed problematic individuals in environments that would erase them naturally, leaving no martyrs, no rallying points, no uncomfortable questions. Kelson 5 had refined away 412 such souls in the last decade alone. Now 413, Sarah felt her consciousness slipping, the edges of her vision darkening. Not sleep, something deeper. Her heart was still beating, but slower now, laboring against blood that had thickened to sludge from dehydration. She thought about the ship. Refugee 7. She'd pulled the manifest herself after the battle, needing to know if her hesitation had been justified or if she'd simply been weak. 340 passengers, 89 children under the age of 12, 17 infants. The ship's emergency beacon had listed casualties from the colony bombardment, evidence of wounded aboard, on medical supplies exhausted, requesting humanitarian corridor for evacuation. And the council had ordered her to fire. She hadn't been able to do it. Her finger had hovered over the confirmation key, and for what felt like an eternity, she'd simply waited. Checked trajectories, recalculated firing solutions, verified target data, all perfectly legitimate tactical procedures, all perfectly timed to give Refugee 7 exactly enough delay to spool up their damaged drive and vanish. The council's review board had seen through it immediately, of course. They weren't fools. They'd built an empire on clarity of purpose and ruthless efficiency. Sarah had known what would happen. She'd documented everything anyway. Every delayed firing order, every questionable target she'd slow-walked, every moment she'd chosen to be ethery in the way she believed they should be, rather than the way the council demanded. 14 times in 3 years, the council had kept her anyway because she was too brilliant to discard. They'd watched her, reassigned her to less sensitive operations, waited for her to learn. Then came the colony of New Birmingham, 50,000 human civilians. The council had ordered orbital bombardment, total sterilization. No survivors. Sarah had refused. Not delayed, not hesitated. Refused. And so they'd sent her here. The darkness was closing in now, warm and almost gentle. Sarah felt her muscles relaxing, her body surrendering to the inevitable. There was a strange peace in it. No more decisions, no more compromises between duty and conscience. She thought of her students. Thessa Vorn, brilliant and fierce, who'd looked at Sarah like she hung the stars. Where was Thessa now? Probably commanding her own vessel, making the hard choices, following orders without question. The way Sarah had taught her. The way Sarah had failed her. Her breathing slowed. The pain receded, not because it had lessened, but because her nerves were shutting down. Her brain conserving what little resources remained for core functions that were themselves failing. Sarah Kane closed her eyes. The twin suns beat down on her still form. The crystalline sand began its patient work of burial, grain by grain. The wind picked up, carrying the sound that was not quite silence, the hum of a planet that had swallowed so many voices it had learned to sing with them. She had stopped breathing. 30 seconds passed. 45. Then came a sound that didn't belong to Kelson V's song. Heavy, deliberate, the crunch of boots against crystal sand, moving with purpose. A shadow fell across Sarah's face, blocking the sun's. Hands touched her throat, checking for a pulse that barely whispered. No, a voice said. Male, human, rough with exertion and something that might have been anger. But yet, don't you dare give up yet. Sarah didn't hear him. She was already gone, sliding into the darkness that had no temperature, no pain, no regret. The man swore words in English that would have meant nothing to her, even if she'd been conscious. He worked fast, pulling equipment from a pack that had seen better years. A scanner, its screen cracked but functional. A medical injector, its reservoir half empty. A thermal blanket that had been patched so many times the original material was anyone's guess. Marcus Wade had not expected to find anyone alive on Kelson 5. The planet's reputation was clear enough. But he'd been tracking a signal for 3 days, something his receiver had flagged as anomalous, and Marcus had learned long ago that anomalies were worth investigating. He'd expected maybe a crash probe, salvage tech, something he could strip for parts or sell to the right buyer. He had not expected an aethery woman 3 minutes past clinical death. The scanner displayed data that made his jaw clench. Organ failure, severe dehydration, internal bleeding. Her leg was destroyed, the bone visible through torn skin that had been further shredded by the abrasive sand. By every medical standard Marcus knew, she should have been dead an hour ago. But the scanner also showed something else, a faint electrical pattern in her brain. Not thought exactly, but not quite nothing. Ethery physiology was different from human. Their cellular structure allowed them to survive oxygen deprivation longer, their brains capable of functioning in states that would leave humans with permanent damage. Marcus didn't know all the specifics. He wasn't a medic, just a former logistics officer with field training and stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. He checked his supplies. One emergency cardiovascular stimulant, one dose of broad-spectrum metabolic stabilizer, one fluid injection pack. Not enough. Not nearly enough. He used them anyway. The stimulant went into the major artery in her neck. Her body convulsed once, a full-body spasm that made Marcus grip her shoulders to keep her from injuring herself further. The metabolic stabilizer followed, designed to jumpstart failing organs. Nothing happened. Marcus counted heartbeats, hers and his. 5 seconds. 10. Come on, he muttered, gripping the scanner like he could will it to show improvement. Come on. You don't get to die when I just found you. At 15 seconds, her heart stuttered. At 20, it beat. At 25, her chest rose with a shallow, painful breath. Marcus released air he hadn't realized he'd been holding. That's it. Stay with it. He worked quickly now, muscle memory from a dozen emergency extractions taking over. The fluid pack had to be administered slowly to avoid shock, so he rigged a drip using salvaged tubing and a gravity feed. The thermal blanket went around her body, its aging heating elements still functional enough to matter. Her leg needed stabilization. Marcus had a collapsible splint, military issue from before the war ended, before everything went to hell and stayed there. He set the bone as best he could, trying not to think about the grinding sensation of fragments. She didn't wake, didn't scream, barely breathed, but she was breathing. Marcus looked at her face, really looked for the first time. Ethery features were similar enough to human that you could recognize the architecture, eyes, nose, mouth, but different enough to trigger something primal in the human hindbrain. The uncanny valley, anthropologists called it. But what Marcus saw wasn't alien horror. It was exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying weight too long. He'd seen that look in the mirror every morning for the last 15 years. The energy cuffs on her wrist caught his attention. Dead, but still locked. Standard Ethery restraints, designed for prisoners, for criminals, or for exiles. Marcus had heard the rumors about Kelson V. Every human who'd survived the war had heard something. The Ethery didn't execute dissenters. They refined them. They found places where nature could do the council's work. This woman hadn't crashed here. She'd been sent. Marcus checked the scanner again. Her vitals were stabilizing, marginally. Not recovering, but not declining. She'd bought herself hours instead of minutes. He could leave her, continue his salvage run. The signal he had been tracking was still out there, somewhere in the Crystal Canyons. Probably worth investigating. She was Ethery, the enemy, the species that had glassed 17 human colonies, killed millions, fought with cold precision and colder hearts. Marcus looked at the dead restraints on her wrists. Then he looked at his own forearm, where the scar tissue formed a pattern he had memorized in the mirror every day since he was 28 years old. A burn in the shape of a hull breach. Civilian vessel. Evacuation class. Refugee 7. His hands started shaking. Not fear, not exhaustion. Something else. Something that felt like fate reaching up from the sand and grabbing him by the throat. No, he said out loud, to the desert, to the universe, to whatever cosmic comedian was writing the script. This is too much. But the scar on his arm had never lied to him before, and it wasn't lying now. Marcus Wade had been 28 years old when Refugee 7's hull breach nearly killed him. His sister Lena had been 8, screaming in the passenger bay while fire-suppressant foam rained down and the evacuation alarm shrieked warnings no one wanted to hear. They'd been dead in the water. Evacuation vessel, civilian registry, caught between a rock and the Ethery fleet that was systematically destroying the colony below. The firing solution had been locked. Marcus had seen it on the emergency display before the power went out. Ethery cruiser, weapons hot, perfect kill angle. They should have died. Instead, the enemy ship had hesitated, long enough for the engineering team to hotwire the backup drive, long enough to spool up and jump blind into space that might have been clear or might have been occupied by a stellar mass. They'd survived. 340 souls had lived because someone on that Ethery cruiser had chosen to wait. Marcus had spent 15 years wondering who, wondering why. He looked down at the unconscious woman, her pale blue skin slowly darkening as the fluids entered her system, her silver eyes hidden behind closed lids. Wondering ended now. He couldn't leave her, not because she was helpless, though she was, not because it was the right thing to do, though it probably was, but because every instinct he'd honed in 43 years of living, fighting, and surviving told him this woman was the answer to a question he'd been asking since he was 28. Marcus gathered her into his arms, careful of the splinted leg, the IV line, the myriad ways she was broken. She weighed less than she should have, dehydration and starvation having carved away everything non-essential. He carried her toward the ridge where his rover waited, half buried in sand, patched with salvaged panels and hope. The wind picked up, erasing his footprints behind him. Kelson V sang its song of the lost and the forgotten. But this time, one of the forgotten was leaving. The shelter Marcus had built was more function than comfort. Curved panels of scavenged alloy stretched over a frame made from rover ribs, sealed against the sand and heat with adhesive that had outlived its manufacturer by a decade. A portable heat unit flickered in the corner, fighting against the chill that came when Kelson V's twin suns dipped below the horizon. Sarah woke to warmth that felt impossible. Her eyes opened slowly, vision blurred, brain struggling to process sensation. Not pain, exactly. Her body had moved past pain into a territory that was more absence than agony. Numb, distant, like her consciousness was piloting her flesh remotely. Above her, fabric moved in a breeze she couldn't feel. Seams of light traced geometric patterns where the panels didn't quite meet. She tried to move. Her body refused. Specifically, her legs screamed refusal loud enough that consciousness wavered. "Don't!" The voice came from nearby, male, speaking ethery with a human accent that was surprisingly good. "If you tear the brace, we're both in trouble." Sarah turned her head slowly. The movement cost more than it should have. A man sat against a crate 3 feet away, cleaning dust from a small tool with a cloth that had seen better decades. Human. 40-something, with the kind of weathered face that came from too much time under harsh suns. Dark hair showing gray at the temples. Eyes that assessed her with the caution of someone approaching an unexploded device. His jacket was sun-bleached, stitched in multiple places. The outline of an insignia marked the shoulder, something that had been removed and re-sewn too many times to be clearly legible anymore. He met her gaze steadily. "You're awake." Sarah's throat was dry as the sand outside. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. The man reached for a canteen and moved closer, slow and deliberate. He offered it to her with the same care someone might offer food to a feral animal. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. The water was cool, impossible, perfect. She drank slowly, muscle memory from survival training overriding her body's demand to gulp. "Small sips," the man said. "You've been out about 16 hours. Your system needs time to adjust." Sarah lowered the canteen and studied him properly. Human features. Definitely military background. The way he moved. The efficiency of his shelter. The clinical approach to her care. "Why?" she managed. Her voice sounded like gravel. "Why what? Why are you here?" The man settled back against the crate. "I'm Marcus Wade, salvage specialist. Kelson V has valuable tech if you know where to look." It was a lie, not complete, but not entirely true either. Sarah had interrogated enough prisoners to recognize the shape of tactical omission. "Humans," she said, each word an effort, "rarely travel alone for salvage." Marcus gave a dry half smile. "Then you haven't met the humans who get sent where nobody wants to go." The words hit harder than he'd probably intended. Exile recognized exile. Sarah tried to sit up. Marcus placed a palm near her shoulder, not touching, but close enough to stop her if she fell. He wasn't afraid of her strength. He was afraid of what she represented. "Your cuffs," she said, noticing they were still locked around her wrists. "I can cut them," Marcus replied. "You didn't." His eyes flicked to her face. "If you wake up and see a human standing over you with a blade near your hands, what do you do?" Sarah paused. Her answer came honestly. "I fight." Marcus nodded once. "Exactly. So I waited. Wanted you awake first. Wanted you choosing." The word choosing resonated. The Aetheri didn't choose, not the way humans seem to understand the concept. Orders moved downward. Obedience moved upward. Choice was a luxury reserved for councils and commanders, never for the discarded. Marcus reached into a pouch and pulled out a compact cutting tool. He set it on the ground between them, then moved back to his crate. There, he said, if you want them off, tell me. If you don't trust me to do it, you can do it yourself. I'll sit over here and watch the horizon like my life depends on it. Which it does. Sarah stared at the tool. A test. A trap, maybe. A strange kind of respect. Her tactical mind assembled possibilities. He could have killed her while she slept. Could have left her in the desert. Could have cut the cuffs and claimed credit for mercy. Instead, he'd given her agency. Your scar, she whispered. Marcus's expression shifted. Not much. Just enough. What scar? Sarah's eyes drifted to his forearm where the burn mark curled like a jagged emblem. That one. Civilian hull breach. Human evacuation vessel. The pattern suggests explosive decompression, rapid sealing, survivable but traumatic. Marcus went very still. Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength even as her body remained weak. Refugee class, emergency configuration, dated approximately 15 years based on scar tissue maturity. You're a medic now? Marcus's voice was careful, controlled. I'm a strategist. Was. I recognize patterns. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Marcus finally looked away, staring at the shelter wall as if he could see through sand and stone and time itself. Refugee 7, he said. The words sounded like confession. Civilian evacuation vessel, registry Echo 773, 340 passengers. Caught in combat space during the retreat from New Anchorage. Sarah's heart, already weak, stuttered. Marcus continued, his voice flat in the way people spoke when emotion was too dangerous to allow. We were damaged, drift only, no weapons, broadcasting distress on all frequencies. The colony below was burning. We'd gotten as many people out as we could before the orbital strike started. He touched the scar without seeming to realize it. Etheric cruiser had us dead to rights. Perfect firing solution. We saw it on the emergency display before the power died. Communications officer said we had maybe 10 seconds before they fired. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but listen. Then, nothing. The cruiser didn't fire. We got the backup drive online. Engineering team did a miracle, got us just enough power to jump. We went blind into unknown space. Could have jumped into a star, a planet, another ship. Marcus finally looked at her again. We didn't. We made it. 340 people lived because someone on that etheric cruiser decided we weren't worth killing. The canteen slipped from Sarah's fingers. Water pooled on the shelter floor, soaking into sand. I delayed, she whispered. I saw the manifest. I couldn't fire. Marcus's jaw tightened. The muscles in his cheek jumped. You, he said. Not a question, a statement, an accusation, a revelation. I was the tactical officer on duty. The firing solution was mine. The order was given. Sarah's voice cracked. I hesitated. I checked the data. 340 passengers, 89 children, 17 infants. Tears formed in her silver eyes, the first moisture her dehydrated body could spare. I couldn't. The council called it treason. They said I was broken by exposure to human sentiment. Marcus stood abruptly, turned away, hands balling into fists. Sarah continued, words flooding out like blood from a wound. They were right to exile me, not for mercy but for weakness. I should have refused the order entirely, should have stood against the practice, fought for change. Instead, I delayed, cowardice dressed as tactics. Stop, Marcus's voice was tight. Just stop. He turned back to her, and his eyes were wet. My sister was 8 years old, and then Lena. She was in the passenger bay with the other kids when the hull breached. She was screaming for me, and I couldn't get to her because I was pinned under debris. His voice broke. She's 23 now, PhD candidate, astrophysics, studies stellar formation and jump point navigation. She's alive, she's brilliant, she's going to change how we travel through space. Marcus crouched down, bringing his face level with Sarah's. She exists because you gave us those seconds, because you chose. You call it cowardice. I call it the bravest thing anyone did that day. Sarah shook her head weakly. You don't understand what it cost. I understand exile, Marcus cut her off. I understand being thrown away by people who are supposed to value you. The Third Orbital Fleet didn't need logistics officers after the war. They needed bodies to staff salvage operations on forgotten rocks like Kelson V. He sat back, ran a hand through his hair. I came here following a signal. Edenfall frequency. You know what that is? Sarah shook her head. Project Edenfall. Human contingency network built during the worst years of the war, when colonies fell and fleets went dark and commands stopped answering. It wasn't meant to win wars. It was meant to make sure humanity didn't disappear quietly. Marcus pulled out a small device from his pocket. A receiver, old military issue, modified extensively. I've been tracking Edenfall signals for 3 years, trying to find the network, trying to find people who remember that survival isn't the same as victory. He met her eyes. I found you instead, and maybe that's what I was supposed to find all along. Sarah looked at the cutting tool still sitting on the ground between them. Symbol of choice, of trust. Cut the cuffs, she said softly. Marcus moved forward, picked up the tool. The blade hummed to life, a thin line of coherent energy. He positioned it carefully against the dead restraints. Hold still, he said. Sparks spat briefly as the energy cut through the reinforced alloy. The first cuff split with a dull snap and fell away. Sarah felt the weight lift. Not physical weight, the cuffs were designed to be light, but the psychological burden of them, the constant reminder of judgment and exile, dropped like a chain breaking. Marcus cut the second cuff. It joined its twin in the sand. Sarah flexed her fingers slowly, testing sensation. Weakness, pain, but also freedom. For the first time since her trial, her hands belonged to her. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus nodded, set the tool aside. We're not out of danger yet. This planet has a way of finishing what it starts. As if summoned by his words, a sound cut through the shelter's relative quiet. High-pitched, electronic, urgent. Marcus's head snapped toward a small sensor unit sitting near the entrance. Its display flashed angry red. Movement detected, he read. Multiple signatures, 3 confirmed. Sarah's tactical instincts, dormant under pain and trauma, flickered back to life like embers finding oxygen. Distance, Marcus checked. 4 kilometers. Closing, aerial configuration. Drones, Sarah said, certainty in her voice. Etheri military grade. They're not here for rescue. Marcus looked at her. Hunting you? Hunting anyone who knows too much. Exile was meant to be a death sentence. If I'm still alive, I'm a loose end. Marcus swore softly. He moved to the shelter's equipment cache, pulling out items with practiced efficiency. A rifle, well-maintained but clearly salvaged. A scanner, a pack of supplies. Can you move, he asked. Sarah tested her good leg. Pain flared, but it was manageable. The injured leg was another story entirely. I can walk, she said slowly. Not well, not fast. Marcus grabbed the splint components, reinforced the brace with quick, efficient movements. Then that'll have to be enough. He powered down the heat unit, began collapsing the shelter's support structure. Everything moved with the speed of someone who'd done emergency evacuations before. Sarah watched him work, mind racing through tactical scenarios. 4th-generation hunter-killers, she said. Designed to evolve mid-engagement. Standard evasion patterns won't work. Marcus glanced at her. Then we go non-standard. Despite everything, pain, fear, exhaustion, Sarah felt something that might have been a smile. Human tactical philosophy, she said. When outmatched, be unpredictable. When outmatched, Marcus corrected, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. Be a problem they didn't expect. He helped Sarah to her feet. She leaned heavily on him, her good leg taking most of her weight, the injured one dragging slightly despite the brace. They moved toward the rover. Rover, half buried but functional. Marcus had concealed it well, covered the heat signature, made it look like another piece of Kelson V's endless debris. As they approached, the sensor beeped again. Closer now. 3 kilometers. Marcus helped Sarah into the passenger seat, secured her with restraints that had probably saved his life more than once. Then he slid into the driver's position and powered up the vehicle. The engine caught with a sound like grinding teeth. Not subtle, not quiet, but alive. Where are we going? Sarah asked. Marcus studied the scanner, the terrain map, the drone trajectories. Somewhere they don't want to follow, he said, and he drove the rover directly toward the crystal canyons, where the spires rose like frozen lightning and the sensor echoes turned navigation into nightmare. Behind them, three bright dots appeared on the scanner, converging. The crystal canyons of Kelson 5 were beautiful in the way that lethal things often were. Spires of compressed silicate rose 300 feet into the air, their facets catching the twin suns and scattering light in patterns that could blind or disorient. The rover's passage between them created a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass, each scrape and impact sending harmonics echoing through the maze. Marcus drove with the controlled aggression of someone who knew the difference between recklessness and calculated risk. The rover lurched over uneven terrain, its suspension screaming protest, but he never slowed. Sarah gripped the restraint harness, her injured leg throbbing with each impact. Pain helped in a way. It pushed back the fog of exhaustion, forced her mind to focus on immediate threats instead of drowning in what-ifs and memories. She studied the scanner display mounted between them, watching the three drone signatures adjust their approach vectors. "They're splitting formation," she said, voice tight with professional assessment. "Standard hunting pattern. They'll try to box us in." "Let them try," Marcus muttered, yanking the controls hard left. The rover's right side scraped against a crystal spire with a sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. Sparks flew. The spire shattered at its weakest point, cascading down behind them in a glittering avalanche. One drone signature veered off to avoid the debris. "They're cautious," Sarah observed, programmed to prioritize self-preservation over immediate target acquisition. "That's exploitable." Marcus glanced at her. "You sound like you're analyzing a training exercise." "Old habits." Sarah's fingers moved over the scanner controls, calling up data layers Marcus probably didn't know the system possessed. Her hands shook, not from fear but from the effort of pushing past pain and exhaustion to access the part of her brain that had commanded fleets. It hurt, not just physically but mentally, like muscles unused for months cramping when forced back into service. But Marcus needed her tactical mind, not her broken body. She forced herself to focus. Drone patterns, terrain advantages, weaknesses in a theory doctrine that she'd spent 40 years exploiting. The knowledge was still there, buried under trauma and despair, but intact. "There," she said, voice stronger now. "Radiation signature 0.7 kilometers northeast. Old crash site?" "Fuel cell leak," Marcus confirmed. "Been bleeding low-level radiation for years. I mapped it 3 months ago." "Can you reach it?" "Probably. Why?" Sarah's eyes gleamed silver in the reflected light from the scanner. "Because hunter-killers are programmed to investigate anomalies. Radiation leaks register as potential threats. If we can make them think we've crashed there," Marcus understood immediately, "they'll investigate while we run. Not run, reposition." Sarah pulled up a terrain overlay. "There, the canyon narrows to 3 meters width. If they pursue in formation, they'll have to go single file. And single file means we can eliminate them one at a time." Marcus barked a short laugh that had no humor in it. Strategist indeed. He adjusted course, pushing the rover harder. The vehicle wasn't designed for this kind of abuse. It was a salvage hauler, meant for careful navigation between debris fields, not combat maneuvers through crystalline death traps. But Marcus had learned long ago that equipment, like people, could exceed its design parameters if you asked it the right way. The radiation source appeared on sensors, a dull orange glow marking contaminated ground. Marcus drove straight toward it, then at the last moment cut the engine completely. The rover's momentum carried them another 50 meters before friction and terrain brought them to a lurching halt behind a cluster of broken spires. Silence fell, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the eternal wind chime sound of the canyon. Sarah watched the scanner. The drone signatures hesitated, their trajectory algorithms recalculating. "They've lost direct visual," she said quietly, scanning for heat signature, energy output, movement. "Will they find us?" "Eventually. But the radiation bloom will confuse their sensors for approximately 2 minutes." She looked at him. "What do you have for weapons?" Marcus reached behind his seat and pulled out a battered case. Inside were 3 devices that looked more like mining equipment than armaments. "Shaped charges," he said, "for breaking salvage free from impact sites. They're old, stability questionable, but they'll still make a hole in something if they go off. One of Sarah studied them with the eye of someone who'd spent 40 years thinking about how to break things efficiently. The drones have adaptive shielding, she said. Direct impact won't penetrate. But if you could create a cascade effect, she trailed off, fingers moving over the scanner again. When she found what she was looking for, her expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. The crystal spires have a resonant frequency, she explained. They ring when struck. If you detonate a charge at the base of a spire while a drone is passing, the harmonic vibration could overload its shield generators. Marcus stared at her. You got all that from the scanner? I got it from knowing how Aetheri technology works. I helped design the shield harmonics on the 4th generation series. Her voice carried something that wasn't quite pride, wasn't quite shame. Before I was exiled, the scanner beeped. The drones had reached the radiation site. On the display, Sarah and Marcus watched the signatures separate, beginning methodical search patterns. Careful, patient, exactly what Sarah had predicted. We have 90 seconds before they expand the search grid to our position, Sarah said. The narrow canyon is 400 meters south. Can we reach it without being detected? Marcus checked the terrain map, calculating angles and cover. If we go on foot, maybe. The rover's heat signature is too obvious even powered down. Then we go on foot. You can barely walk. Sarah met his eyes, steel in her voice, the tone of someone who'd commanded fleets and made decisions that killed thousands. Then you'll help me walk, because sitting here waiting to die isn't acceptable. Marcus recognized that voice. He'd heard similar ones barking orders during the war, during evacuations, during the desperate scrambles to survive when everything fell apart. He nodded once, helped her out of the restraints. Supporting Sarah's weight while carrying the weapons case in his pack pushed Marcus to the edge of his physical capacity. She tried to minimize the burden, using crystal outcroppings for support when possible, but her injured leg betrayed her with every third step. They moved through shadow and light, the twin suns creating zones of blinding glare, the alternating with patches of darkness where the spires blocked illumination entirely. Marcus counted meters in his head, matching them against the scanner readout he'd memorized. 200 meters, 150, 100. Behind them, a drone searchlight swept through the area they'd abandoned, its blue-white beam painting crystal walls with sterile precision. 50 meters. The canyon narrowed ahead, walls closing in like a stone throat. Perfect choke point. Perfect killing ground, if they could reach it. Marcus's foot caught on uneven ground. He stumbled, nearly dropping Sarah. She hissed pain through clenched teeth but didn't cry out. Keep moving, she whispered. 20 meters. The scanner Marcus had strapped to his wrist chirped urgent warning. Drone signature. Directly above them. They froze in the shadow of a massive spire, pressing against crystal that was cold despite the heat of the day. Marcus could hear it now, the drone's propulsion system, a high-pitched whine that set his nerves on fire. Sarah's hand found his, squeezed once. Message received. Don't move, don't breathe, don't exist. The drone passed overhead, searchlight stabbing down into the canyon. It paused directly above their position. Marcus felt Sarah's body tense against his. She was calculating, he realized. Running threat assessments, tactical options, survival probabilities. The searchlight moved on. The drone continued its patrol pattern, systematic and thorough. Marcus and Sarah waited until the sound faded, then moved again. Faster now, caution abandoned for speed. They reached the narrow canyon entrance with seconds to spare. Marcus set Sarah down against the wall, breathing hard. His muscles burned, his heart hammered. But they'd made it. Now what? He asked between gasps. Sarah pointed to the canyon walls. Set charges here and here. When the first drone enters, detonate. The harmonic cascade should overload its shields. It should? 93% probability based on shield harmonics and crystal resonance patterns. And the other 7%? We die. She said it matter-of-factly, like discussing weather. But we were going to die anyway. This way we take them with us. Marcus couldn't argue with that logic. He positioned the charges where Sarah indicated, using adhesive strips from his pack to secure them to the crystal. The shaped explosives were designed for precision work, not combat, but the principle was the same. Focus energy at a specific point, let physics do the rest. While he worked, Sarah pulled his scanner onto her lap and began manipulating controls with fingers that trembled from exhaustion, but moved with absolute certainty. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "Accessing their communication frequency. The drones broadcast on encrypted channels, but I know the protocols." Her voice carried grim satisfaction. "I wrote them." Static hissed from the scanner's speaker, then resolved into bursts of compressed data. To Marcus, it sounded like digital noise. To Sarah, it was language. Her expression changed as she listened, shifted from concentration to confusion to horror. "Marcus," she said quietly, "they're not just looking for me." "What do you mean?" "Their search parameters include secondary objectives. They're scanning for Edenfall remnants. They're looking for your network." Marcus's blood went cold. "How would they know about Edenfall?" "I don't know, but there's more." She adjusted the frequency, catching another burst of data. "Kelson V is listed as containment site for Project Shadowfall." "What's Shadowfall?" Sarah looked up at him, and in her silver eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before. Fear. "Bioweapon development program. The council classified it above my clearance level, but I heard rumors. Experimental toxins designed to target specific genetic markers. Species-specific warfare." The implications hit Marcus like physical blows. "They're using exile sites for testing?" "Not just testing, development. The exiles are—" She couldn't finish. "Test subjects," Marcus finished for her, voice flat. Sarah nodded, her expression sick. "I thought they sent us here to die naturally. I didn't know they were killing us deliberately. Studying how we died, using the data to perfect weapons." The scanner beeped, drone signatures converging on their position. Marcus forced himself to focus. Horror could wait. Survival couldn't. "How many exiles?" he asked. The data stream mentioned 17 sites, estimated 400 casualties over the past decade. Casualties, not exiles, casualties. Yes, Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and terrible, but he forced it down, channeled it into cold purpose. "Then we make sure their drones don't report back," he said. The first drone appeared at the canyon entrance, its sleek form backlit by the suns. It paused, sensors sweeping the narrow passage, detecting the obvious choke point. It should have retreated, called for support, approached from a different angle. Instead, it advanced. Because its programming said thermal signatures indicated targets inside, and targets took priority over tactical caution. Sarah had predicted that too. The drone entered this canyon, shields flickering into visibility as they adjusted to the confined space. Energy barriers designed to deflect projectiles, absorb energy weapons, withstand impacts. They were very good shields. Marcus triggered the first charge. The explosion was sharp, focused, all its energy directed into the base of a crystal spire. The spire shattered, but more importantly, it rang. The harmonic frequency propagated through the canyon walls, amplified by the crystalline structure, building on itself in waves that human ears couldn't hear, but instruments registered as off-the-scale interference. The drone's shields tried to compensate, tried to filter the frequency, tried to adapt. They failed. Shield collapse was instant and catastrophic. The protective barrier inverted, turned its energy inward, and the drone simply came apart. Not an explosion, an unmaking. Components separating at the molecular level. It dropped from the air like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile. 93%. "Two more," Marcus said. The second drone appeared within 30 seconds, moving faster than the first. It had received telemetry from its destroyed companion, analyzed the failure mode, adjusted tactics. Instead of entering the canyon, it climbed, gaining altitude, attempting aerial approach from above, where the canyon walls couldn't provide cover or harmonic amplification. "It learned," Marcus said, tension in his voice. "Then we teach it something else." Sarah's fingers flew over the scanner controls despite the trembling. "It's avoiding enclosed spaces now. Make it think the canyon is our only defense." Marcus understood. He moved the rover's emergency beacon into view at the canyon mouth. Obvious and deliberate bait. The drone took it, descended for strike position, believing itself safe at altitude, outside the harmonic resonance zone. and Sarah triggered the modified charge Marcus had prepared, timed for when the drone crossed into crystal resonance range while still believing itself beyond danger. The harmonic cascade was stronger this time, the canyon walls already stressed from the first detonation. The frequency built faster, peaked higher. The drone's shields held for almost 3 full seconds. Then they didn't. This time the failure was more violent. The shield generator overloaded, fed energy back into the drone's power core, and the resulting explosion painted the canyon walls with molten metal. Marcus's ears rang. Sarah was saying something, but he couldn't hear her over the high-pitched whine that filled his skull. She pulled his face toward hers, mouthed words carefully. Third drone. Different approach. Marcus looked at the scanner she held up. The third signature wasn't approaching the canyon or attempting altitude superiority. It was holding position at maximum weapons range. Smart, adaptive, learning from both failures. It wasn't going to engage directly. It was waiting. For what? Marcus asked, or thought he asked. Sarah's expression answered before she spoke. Reinforcements. It's already transmitted failure data and position coordinates. More will come. She pulled something from Marcus's pack. The last shaped charge. Give me your knife, she said. Marcus handed it over, watched as she pried open the charge's casing with hands that shook from exhaustion. Inside was a compact mass of explosive compound wrapped around a directional focusing array. Sarah removed the array, exposing the raw explosive. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Making it unstable. She worked quickly, efficiently, someone who knew exactly how close to the edge she could push before things went catastrophic. When the drone passes overhead, throw it. That'll detonate on impact. We're too close. I know. Marcus understood then. She was making a choice. Destroy the drone, even if the blast caught her too. Protect him by sacrificing herself. No, he said firmly. Marcus, no. He took the modified charge from her hands. You didn't save my sister just to die protecting me. We do this together or not at all. Sarah opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Something in his expression told her argument was pointless. The scanner showed the third drone finally moving, having apparently decided that waiting for reinforcements was less optimal than eliminating targets before they could escape. It came fast and low, having learned from its companions' deaths not to linger in predictable patterns or enter confined spaces. Marcus didn't think. Thinking took time they didn't have. He threw the charge with the same motion he'd used throwing emergency equipment to crew members during evacuations, during disasters, during all the times when hesitation meant death. The modified explosive tumbled through the air, unstable mass of directed energy wrapped in compromised casing. It struck the drone's underbelly. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then physics caught up. The explosion wasn't directional anymore. It was omnidirectional, a sphere of expanding force that vaporized the drone and sent a shockwave hammering through the canyon. Marcus grabbed Sarah and pulled her down, covering them both as the blast wave passed overhead. Crystal spires above them shattered, raining down in deadly fragments. Marcus felt impacts against his back, sharp and hot, but he didn't let go. When the world stopped ending, he risked looking up. The canyon was changed. The walls were scarred, melted in places. Crystal fragments covered everything like deadly snow, but they were alive. Marcus helped Sarah sit up. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye, blue blood stark against pale skin. He was bleeding from a dozen places, human red mixing with her blue where their bodies had pressed together. 3 for 3, Sarah said, voice shaky but carrying something that might have been wonder. We survived. Don't celebrate yet. Marcus checked his wrist scanner. The display was cracked but functional. We just announced our position to anything with sensors in orbit. He was right. The scanner showed a new signature appearing on the edge of detection range. Not a drone, much bigger. Ship, Sarah confirmed, reading the data. Etheri classification. Command vessel by the signature profile. Marcus felt his stomach drop. They sent a warship after one exile? Sarah's expression was grim. Not after me, after what I represent. If I survived this long, I might talk. Might tell people about the other times I delayed firing orders. Might expose the contradiction between the Council's official position and their actual practices. Other times, how many? Sarah met his eyes. 14 documented incidents over 3 years. Every civilian target I slow-walked. Every questionable operation I undermined. 3 years of evidence that the Council's doctrine of total warfare was exactly as monstrous as it sounded. Marcus stared at her. You were gathering proof. I was trying to change the system from inside. When that failed, I thought at least there would be evidence. That someday someone would find it and understand. Her voice dropped. I sealed the files under my command codes. Only high-level officers could access them. I thought if enough people saw the truth, eventually someone would care. Marcus's scanner chirped again. Not the ethery ship this time. Different signature, different frequency. He pulled the device closer, studied the pattern with hands that started shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Broken triangle. Edenfall. They heard the explosions, he said, voice rough with emotion. They heard us. The scanner displayed a simple text message, compressed data transmitted on protocols Marcus had spent 3 years learning. Signal confirmed, 2 life forms, 1 human, 1 theory, identify. Marcus looked at Sarah. It's them, Edenfall. They want to know who we are. Tell them the truth, Sarah said simply. Marcus activated the transmitter, voice rough. This is Marcus Wade, civilian classification, former logistics engineer, 3rd Orbital Fleet. The response came within seconds. Identity confirmed. Mr. Wade, you are overdue. Despite everything, Marcus laughed. Overdue, like he'd missed a scheduled appointment rather than spent 3 years hunting ghosts across abandoned worlds. I found something, he transmitted. Someone, Sarah Kane, former Etheri Admiral. She's the one who saved Refugee 7. Long pause. Marcus imagined the AI on the other end processing, cross-referencing, verifying against databases that had been compiled in secret over 15 years. When the response came, it carried weight Marcus hadn't expected. Sarah Kane, service record reviewed, 14 documented acts of compassion during 3-year operational period. Exile ordered for refusal to execute orbital bombardment of civilian population centers. Status confirmed as witness. Sarah's eyes widened. They know. They know everything. Project Edenfall tracks everyone who chooses conscience over orders. The transmission continued. Admiral Kane, you have been on our observation list for 15 years. We have monitored 17 exile sites, documenting Council activities, waiting for the moment when evidence could not be buried or denied. You let people die, Sarah said, voice sharp despite her exhaustion. 400 exiles. You could have intervened. 378 confirmed casualties across 17 sites over 12 years. The voice corrected with brutal precision. You survived. And now we have proof the Council cannot deny, evidence they cannot suppress, documentation that will stand in any tribunal. The cold calculus of it hit Marcus like ice water. Edenfall had used the exiles as bait. Let them suffer. Let them die. All to gather evidence for some future reckoning. That's monstrous, he said. That's war, the transmission responded. And now it ends. Etheric command vessel detected in orbital approach. USS Nightfall is moving to intercept. You are no longer alone. The scanner display shifted, showing new data. A second ship's signature appearing in high orbit, larger than the ethery vessel, carrying energy readings that made no sense according to any physics Marcus understood. What is that? Sarah whispered. Marcus knew. He'd heard the stories, the rumors, the legends told by other Edenfall operatives when they met in dark corners of forgotten stations. That's our answer, he said. That's what humanity built when we learned the difference between surviving and surrendering. Above Kelson V, in the space between stars and sand, USS Nightfall unfolded from stealth like a predator revealing itself to prey. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The sky over Kelson V had been the same colorless white-orange for as long as Marcus had been on this world. Twin suns bleeding together at the horizon, sand reflecting heat until the air itself became visible, shimmering and distorting everything beyond 100 meters. Now the sky was changing. Not dramatically, not with fire or thunder, just changing. A section of space above the northern ridge darkened, like reality had developed a cataract. The darkness spread, edges sharp and geometric, until a shape emerged that had no business existing in nature. USS Nightfall didn't announce itself with weapon signatures or broadcast warnings. It simply was. Matte black hull that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, lines that suggested function over form, dimensions that hurt to look at directly because the human brain kept trying to reconcile size with distance and failing. Sarah stared at it through the canyon opening, her tactical mind cataloging details despite exhaustion and pain. Stealth generation unknown, she murmured. Hull composition non-reflective across multiple spectrums. No visible drive emissions, but maintaining stable orbital position, suggesting spatial manipulation technology far beyond documented human capacity. Marcus helped her stand, supporting her weight as they moved to get a better view. "That's Nightfall," he said quietly. "The ship that was never supposed to exist. The one they said was lost in year 3 of the war." "It wasn't lost." Sarah's voice carried certainty. "It was hidden. Developed in secret while the Council believed humanity was on the edge of extinction." "How long has it been operational?" Edenfall doesn't share operational timelines with salvagers, but the rumors started 12 years ago. Sightings on the edge of contested space, ships that appeared and vanished, technology that shouldn't exist. Above them, the darkness shifted. Nightfall was moving, not through space in the conventional sense, but around it. Marcus's scanner couldn't track the movement properly. The ship simply ceased being in one location and began being in another, with no apparent transition between states. "Their positioning," Sarah said, "between us and the Etheric command vessel." As if summoned by her words, the second ship appeared. No stealth, no subtlety. The Etheric command vessel Dominion's Edge dropped from high orbit with the kind of aggressive declaration that came from absolute confidence. Its hull was elegant where Nightfall's was brutal. Sweeping curves of silver alloy, weapon ports arrayed in geometric patterns that were as much art as engineering. Shield arrays ignited in cascading arcs of blue energy, visible even in daylight. Marcus's scanner identified the ship class immediately. Sovereign-class cruiser, crew complement 300, weapons loadout sufficient to glass a continent. "I know," Sarah said softly. "I served on her sister ship for 6 years." On the scanner display, Marcus watched the two vessels take positions. Dominion's Edge held high orbit, energy signatures spiking as weapon systems came online. Nightfall settled into a lower orbital path, directly between the Etheri ship and the planet's surface. Blocking. Marcus's scanner crackled with incoming transmission. Edenfall frequency, but the voice was different now. Human, female, carrying the kind of authority that came from command, not programming. "This is Captain Helena Torrin of the USS Nightfall. Marcus Wade, Sarah Kane, we have visual confirmation of your position. Maintain current location. Extraction team is en route." Marcus activated his transmitter. "Captain, the Etheri ship is being addressed," Torrin interrupted. "Professional but not unkind. Stand by him." The transmission shifted frequency, becoming a broadcast on all standard Etheri military channels. "Etheric Command Vessel Dominion's Edge. This is Captain Helena Torrin, United States Space Command. This region is under human protection. State your intentions." The response came immediately, sharp with disbelief and controlled fury. "Human vessel, you have no authority in this sector. Kelson 5 is designated Etheri Containment Zone. Your presence violates territorial protocols established by the Armistice." Sarah recognized the voice. It hit her like electrical shock, like finding a piece of her past she'd thought buried under sand and time. "Thessa," she whispered. Marcus looked at her sharply. "You know the commander?" "She was my student, my protege." Sarah's hands trembled. "I taught her everything she knows about tactical command. She looked at me like I hung the stars, and I failed her by not teaching her to question the system that would eventually betray us both." Above them, Torrin's response was measured and precise. "Containment zone status is revoked under evidence of systematic human rights violations. We are transmitting documentation of war crimes committed on this and 16 other designated exile sites. Stand down and prepare for tribunal proceedings under Joint Human Etheri Authority." Silence from Dominion's Edge. Marcus imagined the chaos on that bridge, officers looking at each other, trying to process the impossible situation of having their exo operation exposed by a human vessel that shouldn't exist. When Thessavorn's voice returned, it was tighter, more controlled, the voice of someone forcing calm over rising panic. I am Commander Thessavorn, acting under direct council authority. Whatever you believe you have is fabrication designed to destabilize Etheri governance. Withdraw immediately or face engagement. Torin didn't respond immediately. Instead, Marcus's scanner lit up with data transmission. Massive file transfer, broadcast not just to Dominion's edge, but across all frequencies, neutral channels, commercial networks, everything with a receiver in range. Sarah accessed the data stream on Marcus's scanner, her fingers moving with desperate speed despite exhaustion. What she saw made her breath catch. Documentation, detailed, comprehensive, damning. Kelson facility blueprints showing bioweapon laboratories built beneath the crystalline surface. Casualty reports from 17 exile sites. Names and dates and causes of death meticulously recorded. Communication logs between council members discussing acceptable loss rates and experimental protocols, with the casual tone of people ordering lunch. Financial records showing weapons development funding tied directly to exile programs, proving systematic intent rather than administrative negligence. Video footage of automated systems releasing toxins into exile zones, tracking survival times, measuring symptoms, gathering data with scientific precision and moral vacancy, and more. So much more. 15 years of observation, 15 years of evidence, 15 years of Edenfall watching and documenting while exiles died slowly in the sand. They documented everything, Sarah said, voice hollow with shock. Edenfall has been watching for years, recording, building a case strong enough that even the council cannot deny or suppress it. Marcus felt sick. All those people, all those exiles, they died while Edenfall collected evidence? 378 casualties, Sarah confirmed, reading the data with the clinical detachment of someone whose emotions had been overwhelmed into numbness. Across 17 sites, over 12 years of systematic murder, disguised as exile, all meticulously documented. The moral calculus was staggering. Let hundreds die to save millions. Gather proof to prevent future atrocities. The kind of decision that had no right answer, only different degrees of wrong, different calculations of acceptable loss. Marcus's scanner showed the data stream reaching critical distribution. Within hours, every major network in known space would have access. The truth would be impossible to bury, impossible to spin, impossible to dismiss as enemy propaganda when it came with council encryption signatures and verified communication logs. Aboard Dominion's Edge, Commander Thessavorn stared at the same data appearing across her tactical displays. Her bridge crew had gone silent, watching her, waiting for orders that she didn't know how to give because nothing in her training had prepared her for the moment when duty and truth diverged so completely. Her executive officer, Lieutenant Brennan, spoke quietly. Commander, the data appears authentic. Council encryption protocols verified. Communication signatures confirmed. Facility coordinates matching our own records. If this is fabrication, it's more sophisticated than anything in our intelligence estimates of human capabilities. Thessa's hands gripped her command console hard enough that her knuckles darkened to deep cobalt. Her mentor's voice echoed in memory. Lessons from a decade ago when Thessa had been young and certain and convinced that duty and morality were the same thing. Strategy isn't about destroying enemies, Sarah had said during a lecture that Thessa had recorded and replayed dozens of times. It's about protecting your people. And if protecting your people requires becoming something monstrous, you haven't protected them at all. You've just guaranteed that someone will eventually do to you what you did to them. At the time, Thessa had thought it was philosophical abstraction, theory, something to consider in quiet moments but set aside when orders came. Now she understood it was warning, prophecy. The moment Sarah had known was coming, even if Thessa hadn't. Pull Admiral Kane's sealed files, Thessa ordered. Authorization Vorn Delta 7. Brennan hesitated. Commander, those files require Fleet Admiral clearance. Pull them, Thessa repeated, voice hard enough to cut crystal. The files appeared on her personal display. Sealed data, classified above Thessa's rank, but accessible because Sarah had designated her as legacy recipient years before the exile. A final message from teacher to student, locked away for the moment when it would matter most. Thessa opened the first file. What she saw made her want to vomit. Not just the evidence of council crimes, though that was there in excruciating detail, but the personal logs, Sarah's private documentation spanning 3 years of service after Thessa had graduated and taken her first command posting. Entry after entry of moral struggle. Sarah identifying civilian targets and finding ways to delay, to give warnings, to provide escape windows. Knowing each act of compassion brought her closer to discovery and punishment. Documenting everything with the meticulous attention of someone who knew the evidence would outlive her. 14 documented incidents. 14 times Sarah had chosen conscience over orders, had delayed just long enough for evacuation ships to jump, for colonies to receive warning, for children to reach shelters before the bombardments began. And more. Evidence that the council had known, had watched, had kept Sarah operational because her tactical brilliance was too valuable to discard, accepting her small rebellions as the price of her genius until the rebellion grew too large to ignore. The final entry was dated 3 days before Sarah's exile. I no longer believe the system can be reformed from within. I have tried through proper channels and been threatened with charges. I have documented everything, knowing it may cost me everything, hoping that someone will find this evidence and choose differently than I did. Not just once, but consistently. Not just in private, but in public. They will build the world I could not. They will prove that compassion is not contamination, but the foundation of any civilization worth preserving. Thessa Vorn sat in her command chair, surrounded by crew members who looked to her for leadership and felt the foundations of her certainty crack like crystalline spires under harmonic stress. "Commander," her tactical officer said carefully, "Council is transmitting orders. They demand we engage the human vessel immediately and eliminate all witnesses to the data breach." Thessa looked at the tactical display. Nightfall sat in space like a dark promise. Weapons still not charged, shields barely active. It wasn't preparing to fight. It was waiting, giving her time to choose, just like Sarah had chosen. Just like Sarah had given refugees 7 time to choose survival. "Hail Captain Torin," Thessa said. "Commander, do it." The connection established. Torin's face appeared on the display. 56 years old, steel gray hair cut military short, eyes that had seen too much to be intimidated by protocol or rank. "Commander Vorn," Torin said neutrally. "Captain, I need clarification. This data you've transmitted. You claim Admiral Sarah Kane is on the surface. Confirmed, alive and in our custody." Thessa felt something break inside her chest. "I want to speak with her." Torin's expression didn't change. "Stand by." The channel shifted. Static, then a voice Thessa hadn't heard in 15 years, but would have recognized anywhere, even distorted by transmission and exhaustion. "Commander Vorn." Sarah sounded tired, in pain, but alive. Impossibly, impossibly alive. "It's good to hear your voice." Thessa's throat tightened until speaking became physical effort. "Admiral, I thought we were told you died within 48 hours of exile, natural causes." The report said, "The council wishes I had died on schedule," Sarah interrupted, and there was bitter humor in her voice. "Thessa, listen to me carefully. Everything you're seeing is real. The exile sites, the bioweapon testing, the systematic elimination of anyone who questioned council doctrine. I spent 3 years documenting it before they sent me here. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you warn someone who could have helped?" "I tried, through proper channels. I was told to comply or face charges of undermining military authority during wartime. So I documented instead, knowing eventually someone would have to face the evidence. I chose to become a witness rather than a collaborator. You let them exile you rather than destroy the proof. I chose to trust that truth would outlive me, that someone I trained would be strong enough to face it when the moment came." Sarah's voice softened. "Thessa, you were the best student I ever had. Brilliant, dedicated, honorable. But you were also trained to trust the system absolutely. I'm asking you now to question it, not for me, for everyone who comes after, for every officer who will face the choice between orders and conscience and wonder if choosing conscience means choosing exile." Thessa looked around her bridge. Young officers, most barely 30, all trained in the doctrine that made the council's authority absolute and questioning that authority unthinkable. All looking at her for guidance, all depending on her to make the choice Sarah had made 15 years ago. If I refuse council orders, Thessa said slowly, I become what you became. Compromised. Exiled. Everything I've worked for will be stripped away. If you follow them, Sarah countered, you become what I refuse to be. A weapon aimed at innocence. A tool of systematic murder. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if you could have chosen differently. The channel fell silent except for breathing and the background hum of ship systems. Thessa made her decision. Communications, open channel to all hands. I want every crew member on this vessel to hear what I'm about to say. Commander, now. The channel opened. 300 crew members across Dominion's edge stopped what they were doing and listened. This is Commander Vorn. You've all seen the data transmitted by the human vessel. You've all heard the Council's orders to engage and eliminate all witnesses. I am now going to tell you something that will be considered treason by every definition in our military code. She took a breath. Our mentor, Admiral Sarah Kane, is alive on the surface of Kelson V. She was exiled for refusing to commit war crimes against civilian populations. The Council has been using exile sites as bioweapon testing facilities for 12 years. 400 lives were consumed in this program. The evidence is undeniable and has been broadcast across all major networks. Within hours, the entire galaxy will know what the Council has done in our names. Silence across the ship. 300 souls holding their breath. I am refusing Council orders. I will not fire on the human vessel. I will not participate in the cover-up of systematic murder. Any crew member who wishes to relieve me of command and execute Council orders may do so now. I will not resist or retaliate. This is your choice to make. Thessa waited, heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her temples. Lieutenant Brennan spoke first. With respect, Commander, I stand with you. Tactical Officer Marek, standing with the Commander. Navigation Officer Salas, standing with the Commander. One by one, every bridge officer declared support, then voices from engineering, from medical, from weapons control, from crew quarters across the ship. Not unanimous, we'll cite unanimous. 3 crew members requested immediate transfer to escape pods, unwilling to participate in what they saw as mutiny. Thessa granted the request without argument. They had made their choice. She had made hers. The Council's transmissions screamed across command channels. Vorn, stand down immediately, or you will be declared traitor to the Aetheri Union. Your family will be dishonored. Your name will be erased from all records. Thessa looked at the camera, at the Council members she could imagine watching from their chambers on the homeworld, comfortable and safe while others died in the sand. If standing against the murder of innocents makes me a traitor, she said clearly, then I accept that designation. If refusing to be complicit in atrocities dishonors my family, then they will have to bear that burden. But I will not kill to protect your lies. She cut the transmission. Below, in the crystal canyons, Sarah Kane listened to her former student choose conscience over comfort, choose truth over career, choose the hard right over the easy wrong, and felt tears streaming down her face. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight and her grief and her relief all at once. She chose, Sarah whispered. She actually chose. Because you showed her it was possible, Marcus said. Because you paid the price first and proved that exile wasn't the end. That truth could survive even when truth-tellers didn't. Above them, Nightfall's Captain Torin transmitted again. Dominion's Edge, your position is noted and appreciated. Stand by for extraction protocols. Admiral Kane, Mr. Wade, we're bringing you home. 2 shuttles descended through Kelson V's atmosphere, one from Nightfall and one from Dominion's Edge, meeting at neutral coordinates on the desert floor that had tried to kill Sarah and had failed. Marcus helped Sarah walk from the canyon to the landing site, her weight against him familiar now, her breathing labored but steady. The splint on her leg had held, despite everything. She would need proper medical treatment, reconstructive surgery on the shattered bone, months of rehabilitation. But she would live. The shuttles touched down simultaneously, ramps lowering in mechanical synchronization. From Nightfall emerged Captain Helena Torin and a medical team carrying equipment that looked more advanced than anything Marcus had seen during his fleet service. From Dominion's Edge came Commander Thessa Vorn with two security officers whose weapons remained holstered. They met in the middle in the sand that had drunk the blood of 400 souls, under the twin suns that had witnessed so much death and were now witnessing something different. Thessa approached slowly, eyes fixed on Sarah with an expression that cycled through disbelief, relief, grief, and something that might have been hope. The student was taller now, broader in the shoulders, carrying the weight of command that came with years of service. But her eyes were the same, sharp, questioning, seeking guidance. Admiral Kane, she said formally, voice controlled despite the emotion underneath. Commander Vorn, Sarah replied, just as formally. They stood 3 feet apart, separated by 15 years in exile and choices that had defined them both. Thessa broke first. She closed the distance and embraced Sarah, careful of injuries but firm enough to be real, to be connection, to be the physical manifestation of everything words couldn't express. I'm sorry, Thessa whispered against Sarah's shoulder. I'm sorry I didn't question sooner. I'm sorry I trusted when I should have verified. I'm sorry I let them convince me that your exile was justified instead of recognizing it as the atrocity it was. Sarah returned the embrace with one arm, the other braced on Marcus for support because her leg couldn't hold her weight alone. You questioned when it mattered, she said. That's what counts. You had the courage to see the truth even when seeing it cost you everything you'd worked for. That's not failure, Thessa, that's evolution. They separated. Torrin stepped forward, extending her hand to Sarah in the human custom of greeting. Admiral Kane, Captain Helena Torrin, USS Nightfall, Project Edenfall Operational Command. On behalf of humanity and everyone who believes that conscience matters more than orders, I'm offering you extraction, medical treatment, asylum, and the chance to ensure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Sarah took the offered hand, grip weak but present, connection made across species and history. And what comes after asylum, Captain? Torrin's expression was serious, carrying the weight of someone who understood exactly what she was asking. A tribunal, joint human ethery jurisdiction, supported by 17 neutral species who have agreed to serve as arbiters. Your documentation provides the legal foundation. The evidence Edenfall has gathered provides corroboration. We're asking you to testify as primary witness to Council war crimes. Testifying makes me a permanent target for every Council loyalist in known space. It means spending years in courtrooms instead of recovering in peace. It means my life will never be private again. Yes, it means I'll have to relive every moment of documentation, every delayed order, every choice that led to exile. I'll have to explain to the galaxy why I didn't do more, why I didn't refuse sooner, why I chose documentation over direct confrontation. Yes, Sarah looked at Marcus, who'd been silent through the exchange, letting her make this choice without interference or pressure. What do you think? She asked. Marcus considered, looked at this woman who'd saved his sister 15 years ago, who'd been sent to die for that choice, who'd survived through sheer stubborn refusal to let cruelty have the final word. 15 years ago, you gave 340 people a future, he said. My sister included. She's studying stars now because you gave her time to grow up. Now you can give millions of people across dozens of species a chance at peace, a chance to believe that systems can change, that choosing conscience doesn't mean choosing death, that mercy is stronger than orders. He squeezed her hand gently. That's worth the risk. That's worth everything. Sarah turned back to Torrin. I have conditions. Name them. First, Commander Vorn and every crew member of Dominion's Edge who chose to stand with her receive full amnesty and protection. They chose conscience when it cost them their careers. That deserves reward, not punishment. Torrin nodded. Already arranged. Edenfall has prepared asylum protocols for any Aetheri military personnel who defect based on the evidence. Vorn and her crew are included, with additional provisions for family members who may face retaliation. Second condition, the 400 who died in the exile program are named. Everyone, no anonymous casualties, no statistics, no forgotten victims. They get monuments. They get memorial services. They get recognition as the people the Council murdered, not mistakes the Council corrected. The documentation already includes full names and service records. Memorial sites are being planned for each of the 17 exile worlds. The dead will be remembered. Sarah straightened as much as her injuries allowed, pulling herself to attention despite pain and exhaustion in Marcus's supporting arm. Then I'll testify. I'll stand before the tribunal and speak every truth I documented. I'll answer every question about what I did and why I didn't do more. And I'll make sure that every officer in every fleet across every species understands that following orders is not the same as doing what's right. Medical personnel moved forward, but Sarah held up her hand one more time. One more thing, she said, looking at Thessa. I need you to testify with me. Not as a defector, but as an officer who chose to verify rather than obey. Your voice will carry more weight than mine because you represent what the system can become when good people choose to question it. Thessa's eyes widen. I'm a junior commander. I have no authority in tribunal proceedings. You have the authority of choice, Sarah interrupted. You prove that orders are not absolute, that conscience can exist within structure, that evolution is possible without revolution. That's the message the Aethery people need to hear. Not that their military is corrupt, but that their military can reform when officers choose honor over obedience. Thessa looked at her crew, at the shuttles, at the desert that had almost killed her mentor, and the human who'd saved her. I'll testify, she said. I'll stand beside you and tell the truth about what choosing conscience cost and why it was worth the price. Medical personnel surrounded Sarah then, scanners analyzing, equipment stabilizing, transport gurneys sliding beneath her as they prepared to move her to Nightfall's medical bay. Marcus stayed close, refusing to be separated, his presence a constant anchor. As they lifted her into the shuttle, Sarah looked back at Kelson V one final time. The twin suns, the crystal sand, the planet that had tried to refine her away and had failed. Goodbye, she whispered to the 400 souls who hadn't survived, who died slowly while Edenfall documented and waited and built a case strong enough to topple a government. Your deaths will mean something, I promise. The shuttle ramp closed, engines engaged, and Sarah Kane left Kelson V behind, leaving the planet with fewer secrets and more ghosts than when she'd arrived. Above them, Nightfall and Dominion's Edge maintained parallel orbits, former enemies now allies in service of truth. The war had ended 15 years ago, but peace, real peace, was only just beginning. 6 months later, Neutral Station Concordia hung in space at the intersection of human and Aethery territory, equidistant from both homeworlds, a monument to diplomacy built on the foundations of mutual exhaustion after a war that had nearly consumed both species. The tribunal chamber was packed. Representatives from 43 species filled the gallery. Journalists from 200 networks broadcast to audiences measured in billions. Observers from every major government in known space watched with the intensity of people witnessing history unfold in real time. Sarah Kane stood at the central podium, no longer an exile, no longer a prisoner, but a witness in the truest sense of the word. She'd spent 3 months in medical rehabilitation. Her leg had been reconstructed using a combination of Aethery regenerative technology and human bone grafting techniques, a physical symbol of the cooperation that the tribunal represented. Her organs had been repaired, her body restored to something approaching full function. But the scars remained, visible reminders of Kelson 5 etched into her skin, reminders that she carried with something that looked like pride. She wore civilian clothes, simple and practical, with no rank insignia or military decoration. Those belonged to the admiral she'd been. This testimony came from the woman she'd become. My name is Sarah Kane, she began, her voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. For 40 years I served the Aethery Union, believing that duty and morality were identical. I was wrong. I was taught that questioning orders was weakness. I was wrong. I was told that compassion for enemies was contamination. I was catastrophically wrong. She presented the evidence methodically, with the same attention to detail she'd once brought to tactical planning. 17 exile sites, 427 casualties, each name spoken aloud, each service record displayed, each face shown to the assembled representatives. Council communications discussing experimental protocols with the casual tone of administrators optimizing efficiency rather than people ordering systematic murder. Financial records proving that bioweapon development had been funded through exile programs for 12 years, with full knowledge and approval from the highest levels of Aethery government. Video documentation of automated systems releasing toxins, tracking survival times, measuring symptoms, gathering data with a scientific precision, and complete moral vacancy. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, damning. The prosecution, led by a coalition of ethery reformists and human legal experts, asked questions she answered with painful precision. Admiral Kane, why didn't you expose these crimes sooner? I tried through proper channels. I was threatened with charges of undermining military authority during a wartime. I chose documentation over confrontation, hoping evidence would outlive me and speak when I could not. The defense, counsel-appointed lawyers fighting to minimize damage and preserve what remained of their client's credibility, attacked with arguments that Sarah had anticipated and prepared for. You delayed firing orders 14 times over 3 years. How many ethery soldiers died because enemies you allowed to escape returned to fight another day? Sarah met the question without flinching, without defensive anger, with only the calm certainty of someone who had counted the cost and accepted it. 47 confirmed ethery casualties across those engagements, attributable to forces that might have been eliminated had I followed orders without delay. I remember every name. I have contacted every family. I carry that weight every day. She paused, let the silence stretch. I also remember 612 civilian lives spared across those 14 incidents. Most of them children, families, people whose only crime was existing in territory the council wanted to claim. War requires hard choices, but choosing massacre over tactics, choosing genocide over strategy, choosing systematic extermination over targeted military action, that's not war, that's atrocity dressed in military terminology. The gallery murmured. The tribunal chair, a neutral species representative with compound eyes and perfect impartiality, raised a manipulator appendage for silence. Admiral Kane, what outcome do you seek from these proceedings? Sarah took a breath, gathering the words she'd rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. Justice, not revenge. Investigation, not execution. I want the officers who created and maintained these programs held accountable through proper legal proceedings. I want the systems that allowed this to happen dismantled and rebuilt with oversight. And I want assurance, binding, enforceable assurance, that no one, etheri, human, or any other species, will ever again be discarded for choosing compassion over cruelty. She looked directly at the council representatives in their segregated seating. I don't want them dead. I want them to face what they've done. I want them to hear the names of 400 people they murdered. I want them to explain to the galaxy why efficiency mattered more than ethics. And then I want them removed from any position where they can ever make such choices again. The testimony continued for 3 days. Sarah answered every question, provided every detail, held nothing back. On the 4th day, Commander Thessavorn took the podium. She testified about receiving the data, about reviewing Sarah's sealed files, about the moment when duty and morality diverged and she had to choose which mattered more. Admiral Kane taught me that strategy was about protecting our people, Thessa said, her voice steady despite the weight of speaking before the assembled representatives of known space. She lived that teaching even when it cost her career, her freedom, her life as she knew it. I'm here because she showed me that following orders and doing what's right are not always the same thing. I'm here because she proved that choosing conscience doesn't make you a traitor. It makes you the kind of officer your people actually need. The tribunal proceedings would last months. There would be investigations, sanctions, reforms. The council would fight every step, but the evidence was too comprehensive, too public, too documented to be buried or dismissed. But for Sarah, the most important moment came after her testimony concluded outside the tribunal chamber, where Marcus waited with a young woman Sarah had never met in person, but whose existence had shaped the last 15 years of her life. Lena Wade was 23 years old, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the kind of comfortable academic clothing that suggested someone more at home with equations than politics. She looked at Sarah with eyes that carried gratitude too immense for language. Admiral Kane, Lena said, extending her hand in the formal human greeting. Sarah took it, gripped stronger now after months of rehabilitation, but still carrying the memory of weakness. Dr. Wade, your brother has told me about your research. Astrophysics, jump point navigation, and spatial anomaly prediction. Lena smiled, and it transformed her face from serious scholar to someone younger, lighter, free of the weight Sarah carried. I study stars and the space between them. I model probabilities and calculate safe paths through dangerous territory. Keeping people safe, Sarah said softly. Yes. Lena's smile faded into something more serious, more profound. I was 8 years old on Refugee 7. I remember the ship shaking. I remember the alarms. I remember my brother holding me in the passenger bay, telling me everything would be okay, even though I could see in his eyes that he didn't believe it. She took a breath. I remember the moment when the ship stopped shaking, when the engines fired, when we jumped to safety. For 15 years, I wondered if someone had chosen to let us live, or if we'd just gotten impossibly lucky. Tears formed in her eyes. Now I know. Your hesitation gave me childhood. Your choice gave me education. Your 9 seconds of doubt that became certainty gave me everything I am and everything I'll become. Sarah felt her own tears coming, the release of 15 years of wondering if her choice had mattered, if the price of exile had purchased anything more than personal suffering. Meeting you shows me that those 9 seconds mattered more than 40 years of war, Sarah said, voice breaking. Thank you for existing. Thank you for studying stars. Thank you for being proof that choosing compassion creates futures. Lena closed the distance between them and hugged Sarah with the fierce gratitude of someone embracing the reason they existed. Sarah returned it, this connection across species and trauma and the vast darkness between stars. When they separated, Lena wiped her eyes and pulled herself back to professional composure. I'm presenting research next month, she said. New jump drive protocols based on collaborative human ethery data analysis. Early trials show 63% reduction in jump-related casualties and navigation errors. Saving lives with science instead of weapons, Sarah said. That's the future worth fighting for. I want you there, Lena said, sudden and impulsive, and completely sincere. At the presentation, as my guest, as the person who made it possible for me to exist long enough to do this work. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragement, then back at Lena. I would be honored, she said. 4 weeks later, the research auditorium on Concordia Station was filled with scientists, military observers, and representatives from both human and ethery space agencies. Lena Wade stood at the presentation podium, displaying stellar maps and mathematical models that represented years of collaborative research. Sarah sat in the front row, legs still occasionally aching but functional, mind clear and focused. Marcus sat beside her, their friendship now something comfortable and permanent, built on shared survival and mutual respect. Thessa Vorn occupied the second row, attending as ethery military observer for the Reform Council that had replaced the War Crimes Tribunal defendants. Current jump technology relies on brute force spatial compression, Lena explained to the assembled experts, her voice confident in her expertise. Ships essentially hammer through the fabric of space, creating temporary ruptures that allow faster-than-light travel but carry significant risk of catastrophic failure. She advanced the display. My research, conducted with Dr. Tevin Moresh of the Ethery Spatial Institute, proposes adaptive navigation, reading space instead of breaking it, following natural stress patterns in space-time rather than forcing new ones. Early trials using combined human intuitive modeling and ethery mathematical precision show 63% reduction in jump-related casualties and navigation errors. Questions followed, technical and probing. Lena answered each with the kind of comfortable expertise that came from knowing her field completely. Her passion for the work was evident in every response. Her conviction that this research would save lives, driving her beyond mere academic interest into genuine calling. After the presentation, small groups formed in the reception area. Scientists clustered around Lena, debating methodology and potential applications. Military observers discussed implementation timelines and budget requirements. An elderly ethery scientist approached Sarah, moving slowly but with purpose. His coloring faded to pale blue that suggested advanced age. Admiral Kane? He asked quietly. Sarah inclined her head. Yes? I'm Dr. Vess, Quantum Mechanics Division at the Spatial Institute. I wanted to thank you. For what? His voice thickened with emotion carefully controlled. My daughter was flagged for exile candidacy 3 months before your testimony. Ideological contamination, they called it. She questioned research protocols that violated informed consent ethics, refused to participate in experiments that treated subjects as disposable test cases. He clasped his hands together in the ethery gesture of profound gratitude. Your testimony stopped the exile programs. The Reform Council cleared her record. She's alive and continuing her work because you had the courage to speak true. When speaking, it cost you everything. Sarah took his offered hands, grip firm despite the persistent weakness. She's alive because people like you chose to listen, Sarah said, because you heard the evidence and demanded change. Speaking truth means nothing if no one has the courage to hear it. Your daughter lives because you were brave enough to question the system that would have killed her, Doctor. Vessa's eyes glistened. The system told us questioning was weakness. You proved that obedience without questioning is the true weakness. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you for showing us that conscience is not contamination. He departed, leaving Sarah with the weight of gratitude that felt both overwhelming and necessary. Marcus approached with drinks, Thessa following. The small group that formed around Sarah represented something that would have been impossible 2 years ago. Humans and Aetheri, former enemies, united by the belief that conscience mattered more than orders. Edenfall offered me a position, Sarah said to the group, sharing news she'd received that morning. Strategic advisor for the Joint Human Aetheri Defense Initiative, planning for cooperative security instead of competing militaries. The Reform Council wants you too, Thessa added. Liaison officer between old military structure and new ethical oversight frameworks. Bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. Sarah smiled, genuine and tired and hopeful in equal measure. Everyone wants the exile, the woman who was supposed to die in the sand and had the audacity to survive. Lena joined them, flushed from the successful presentation and animated conversation. Maybe because you proved exile doesn't mean erasure. It means evolution. You were discarded for choosing compassion, and that choice ended up toppling the government that discarded you. That's not weakness. That's power they didn't recognize until it was too late to stop. They moved to the observation deck, looking out at space where Nightfall and the newly renamed Dominion's Witness hung in parallel orbits. Human and Aetheri crews worked joint maintenance operations, cautious but professional, learning to exist together in the way that peace required. But war had made seem impossible. 15 years ago, I gave you 9 seconds, Sarah said to Marcus, watching the ships through the reinforced viewport. You gave me a second chance at life. We'll never be even. But maybe that's the point. Maybe debt isn't meant to be balanced, but to be paid forward. Marcus shook his head, smiling. You gave me my sister. I gave you bandages and a rover ride through a crystal canyon while drones tried to kill us. The accounting is ridiculous. Then I suppose we'll need to keep working together until we figure out the math, Sarah said. Lena watched the crews below, human and Aetheri technicians solving problems together, combining human adaptability with Aetheri precision to create solutions neither could achieve alone. My research uses data from both civilizations, she said, echoing what she'd told the scientific audience. Aetheri mathematical precision, human intuitive modeling. Together, we're discovering things neither species could alone. That's what your choice created, Admiral. Not just my survival, but the possibility of cooperation we didn't know existed. As Sarah watched the young people below, human and Aetheri engineers working side by side, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in decades. Hope. Real, tangible hope for a future built on something other than exhausted ceasefires and mutual suspicion. Compassion isn't weakness, she said softly, voice carrying to the small group around her, but meant for herself as much as them. It's the strongest choice we make because it trusts that tomorrow will prove us right. And sometimes, if we're fortunate and stubborn and refuse to let cruelty have the final word, tomorrow actually delivers on that trust. Below them, a human technician and an Aetheri engineer solved a problem together, their combined solution more elegant than either could have achieved separately. Above them, stars burned with light that had traveled for years to reach this moment, this place, these people who chose to build instead of destroy. And in the space between, Sarah Kane stood as witness to the future she'd bought with 9 seconds of hesitation that became certainty, 15 years of exile that became testimony, and a decision that cost everything and gave back more than she'd ever imagined possible. She had closed her eyes in the desert expecting death. She had opened them to find that the life she'd saved had saved her in return. And the mercy she'd given, once released into the universe, had echoed across species and stars and time, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. The woman who was supposed to die in the sand had lived to see tomorrow. And tomorrow, despite everything that had tried to prevent it, was beautiful.